Thanks again for coming. My name is Dan Ascher, and I'm president of A+ Test Prep and Tutoring. And I'm going to be talking to you today about the PSAT, information you need to know about the PSAT, as well as how to use the information to help yourself and your student going forward. So if you have any questions, I'm going to ask you to use the chat function of the webinar. So on your screen, it should look like this, and you'll see a chat symbol up here in this red circle. If you click on the chat symbol, you should be able to see the chat on your screen. And if you have any questions anytime during the presentation or after the presentation, feel free to please send a chat message, and I will respond to your chat as I go through the presentation. Okay, so we're going to get started, and the first thing we're going to talk about is the overview of what we'll be talking about over the next 25 or 30 minutes about the PSAT. So we're going to discuss what is the PSAT and do a little bit of a dive into what is on the test and how to interpret the results. And then after we complete that part of it, we will talk about how the information is helpful for you in relating the scores on the PSAT to the SAT and ACT, and how that can help you make a test prep plan for your son or daughter. So the PSAT itself is administered during October of both sophomore and junior years in high school. And unlike the SAT, it has a little bit of a different score range. The score range on the PSAT has a maximum of 760 points in each of two areas, whereas the SAT has a maximum score of 800. Based on the scores that you get on the reading and the writing, also considered to be English portion of the test, you will get a verbal score, again, maximum is 760. And you will also get a separate score for math, maximum of 760. And so the total score the maximum score that you could get would be 1520 on the test. There is no essay, unlike on the actual SAT, there's no essay. It's mainly used as a practice test for the SAT, but also it's an early warning system, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but it gives you an idea of how your student might perform on the SAT when they take it. The PSAT scores translate directly to the SAT scores. Basically, the idea is if you were to get a certain number on the PSAT, for example, if your math score was a 600, the expectation would be that you'd also get a 600 on the SAT next. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is what your school report will look like when you receive the paper copy of the PSAT results. So if we look over here, we have 960. That would be, in this case, that's the individual's score, and that's made up of two scores, the verbal, which is 430, and the math score, which is 530. And like I said earlier, the verbal score is made up of reading and writing, and we'll take a look at that a little bit more in depth as we continue. They're also giving you a percentile. So this says for this particular score of 960, the student is in the 51st percentile, which means that they scored higher than about 50% of the students who take this test. But you can also notice over here that the math score is in the 69th percentile. So this student's math score is considerably higher, relatively speaking, than the verbal score, which is only in the 31st percentile. Down here, you'll notice that there's a benchmark score. The benchmark is designed to tell you that you're ready for college. So a 430 on the reading and writing is a little bit lower than what you should have. The minimum score you need at 460 to be college ready. And on the math side, the benchmark score is 510. So this student is considered to be college ready at this point. Obviously, they could do a lot better. They could get a maximum score of 760. So it's not as if they have the best score they could get, but the score indicates that the student is ready to do college level work. Okay, now we continue. I'm going to show you a little bit more about how these scores are calculated. So the first thing we'll do is look at the verbal side, which is over here, and this student received a 23 score on the reading, and that's based on a scale of 8 to 38, and a 20 on the writing and language. So there are two separate sections. There's a reading section and a writing section on the PSAT. In order to get the overall score, what you do is you add these two numbers together, the 23 and the 20, and that gives you 43, and you multiply by 10 to get the scaled score of 430, which we just saw on the previous slide. That's where that comes from. The math score of 530, basically you get a math score on the same scale. In this case it was a 26.5, again out of 38. And to get the score, the scaled score, you would basically double this number, which will give you 53. And you multiply that number by 10 to get your scaled score, which is 530. So basically the reading and the writing together gives you the number that you multiply by 10 to get your scaled score. In the math case, you actually have only one number, so instead of adding them together, you just multiply by 2. And then you multiply by 10 to get your scaled score. Okay, now, as we continue looking at the score report that you receive, you'll see that there's a breakdown for the 4 sections. Okay, there are 4 sections on the PSAT. There is no essay. The first section is reading. There are 47 questions. In this case, the student answered 21 correctly. There were 25 questions they answered incorrectly, and 1 question they did not answer at all. And then you can see the same breakdown for the writing and language. In this case, there are 44 total questions. The student got 17 correct, 26 incorrect, and there was 1 that they skipped. On the math side of the test, you'll notice that there are 2 sections. So, as we just discussed, the math is half of the test. So that's why you have, if you take the reading and the writing score together, you get your overall verbal score. On the math side, you have 2 math sections, but together they give you 1 score. In this case, you have a calculator section, which is longer. That's the section of the test where you can use a calculator. There are 31 questions. In this case, the student answered 15 correctly. There were 14 incorrect answers, and 2 questions were not answered. And then the math no calculator section is a shorter section. And on the SAT, it's the same thing. There's a longer section that you can use a calculator for, and a shorter section that you can't use a calculator for. Then if we look over here on the key, you'll see that you will have, in the score report that you have received for your student, you'll have a breakdown here for every question, and they'll tell you whether the student answered it correctly or incorrectly, or if they omitted it. So, and it also tells you the difficulty level of the questions. So, in this case, we're seeing for question number 1, the correct answer is A. The student answered it correctly, so there's a check mark, and this is considered to be an easy level question. Question 2, the correct answer is B. The student did not answer it correctly, so they put in an A, and it's also this is a medium level difficulty question. So you'll see that for every single question on the test, you'll have a breakdown of whether the student answered it correctly or incorrectly, and also gives you the difficulty level of the question. The students receive the score report and a copy of the actual test they took, so they have the opportunity to review the test and look through the individual questions to see whether they, what types of questions they had trouble with. Now here's another score report that we're going to look at. This is an online score report. So It's the same information. It's just presented a little bit differently. The paper version is what we've been looking at up to now. At this point, we're looking at what you would see if you went into the online version of the school report. And if you're not sure how to access it, every student can go to the College Board website, which is collegeboard.com, and they can create an account. They will take the information that they have based on the taking the test at the school. They'll create an account. The College Board will verify the student's identity, and then the student can log in and receive this information. So in this case, we have a student who took the PSAT in October. The student was a junior in high school, and the student received a total score of 1250. In this case, the math score was, verbal score was a 630 out of 760, and the math score is 620 out of 760. Then, we'll have the same information that we looked at earlier for the other student. In this case, same information we talked about. We scored it higher, so a 630 is considered to be 93rd percentile, and the math score of 620 is considered to be 92nd percentile. And you'll also notice that they give you a score range here. So in this case, they're saying that if you get a 620, then that gives you a band of scores, which is in this little blue area here. And that tells us that the expectation is that the student will get somewhere between a 590 and a 650 on the actual SAT when they take it. They're saying that basically you'll be 30 points below the 620 and 30 points above it, and that will give you the range of scores you can expect if you were to take the SAT in the near future. Again, I want to remind you, if you have any questions, please use the chat function, and you can go ahead and just type questions for me, and I'll be happy to answer them. Now, continuing to look at the online school report for the PSAT, you'll see that you receive a breakdown of more specific question types. So in this case, these are types of questions that you'll find in the reading and writing portions. These are called subscores. Each of these subscores is out of a maximum score of 15. In this case, for the command of evidence questions, and that basically means being able to pull the evidence out of the reading passage in order to answer questions. The student got a score of 12 out of 15, and that is a very high score in this case. It's 93rd percentile for someone who is a junior in high school. The maximum score being 15, that's pretty close. That's in the higher range. For words and context, this is more sort of vocabulary-oriented questions on the test. The student received 10 out of 15. That's still a good score, but it's not in this green band, which is the highest area. And so you can see that is a little bit lower of a percentile. And we also have a couple of other categories here for the writing portion. And we'll have a similar breakdown for the math. So you have these subscores. The subscores don't count for anything. It's only designed to give you some information about how you're performing. The only scores that count on the actual SAT are the scaled scores at the end, which we looked at earlier. So for the student, in this case, about a 620 in math and a 630 in the verbal side, that is the score that counts for them. These are just to give you an indication of how you're doing in each area. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the National Merit Scholarship. The National Merit Scholarship Corporation is an organization that uses the PSAT to determine if students may qualify for this scholarship. This is the only reason that the PSAT actually counts for anything. Because the PSAT score is not the score that's used for college admissions. That would be the SAT score, or if the student took the other test, the ACT. But for the PSAT, it's really designed to be an early warning to tell you how you must score on the real thing. If you have a very, very high score on the PSAT, you may be a National Merit commended student, There are three categories for the national merit. One is commended, the second is the semifinalist category, and the third is the finalist category. And initially, when you receive your scores, if your selection index, this number here, is quite high, you will be either in the commended or semifinalist category. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how those scores are determined. First of all, the selection index is determined by using the numbers that we saw earlier for the reading, the writing, and the math. And they're going to be actually weighted more towards verbal than math. So they're going to count the reading score, and then the writing score, and then the math score. So each of those is counted as 1/3 of your overall score. So unlike on the actual test itself, where you get a score that's half math and half verbal, the national merit number, the selection index, is actually 1/3 reading, 1/3 writing, and 1/3 math. For the class of 2020 in Pennsylvania, a selection index 220 is what we're expecting to be the requirement to be a semifinalist. And we won't know that until September when they put the actual numbers out. But that's where we've been, and we're around that number going forward. So here's an example of how those numbers are computed. In this case, we have a student who scored a math score of 670, and the verbal score, which is also known as evidence-based reading and writing, the scaled score for that is 720. Okay. Now the underlying scores, in this case, the student received 33.5 in math, 35 in reading, and 37 in writing. Now these are very high scores. The maximum score on each of these is 38, as we saw earlier. Again, if you take this math score and you double it, that gives you 67. You multiply it by 10, and you get the scaled score. And for the reading and the writing, as we saw earlier, if you add these two numbers together, 35 and 37, you'll get 72, and you multiply by 10 to get the scaled score, which is 720. The selection index for the National Merit Program is where basically you take these three numbers, 33.5, 35, and 37, add those three together. In this case, we will get 105.5. Then we multiply that number by 2 to get the selection index number. In this case, is 211. That number, in this case of 211, is probably good enough for a student to be commended, which is an honor, but not high enough for the student to be a semi-finalist in the National Merit Scholarship. And you can see that these are quite high scores, like I said earlier. The maximum score is 38 on each of these three areas. So in order to get a 220, it's going to be very difficult. You have to have almost perfect scores. A maximum selection index is actually 228, because if you got a 38 in each of these three areas, that's what it would come out to be, a 228. Okay, now, moving on to talking about the PSAT and early warning system. Like I said earlier, it's basically designed to give you information about how your student would do on the actual SAT. Now, looking at these numbers, we break them into three categories for the students that we work with. If your student has a 1200 or higher score on the PSAT, that's a pretty good score, and those are students that may potentially be able to get into the national range if they work on it. Score of the 1,000 to 1,200 is sort of the medium range of the students that we work with, and then there's a range of students that are below 1,000. So we use this as a way of kind of looking at what the students should do, and I'm going to explain how we use this information to help our students. So generally, we recommend that all of our students take a pre-proctored SAT and an ACT either at the end of their sophomore year or in the summer between 10th and 11th grades. And if you've taken the PSAT, you have a pretty good indication of what your practice SAT score would be. We also recommend that you try the ACT because that could end up being a better fit for you. So, for a student who has a score higher than 1200 or the equivalent on the ACT of 25, we recommend starting to do test prep right after sophomore year, and hopefully getting your score up so they can potentially be at the national merit level. In those cases, we would be preparing students to take the PSAT as a junior and to take the SAT soon after, in the next month in November. For students in this range, if your student has somewhere between a 1,000 and a 1,200, we recommend during the summer, between sophomore and junior year, you do some tutoring to improve the student's subject area skills in 3 areas: the reading, the writing, and the math, and then planning to do some test preparation after that, which would probably to be to prepare for an SAT or ACT in the spring of the junior year. And then this bottom category here, students that have PSAT scores below 1,000, those are students that we think they should spend more time building their fundamental skills starting sooner rather than waiting, because they probably need a lot more work on the basics of the reading, the writing, and the math skills. And then doing test prep a little bit later in the spring of their junior year. So these are general recommendations. We would give more specific recommendations based on the individual student in a conversation that we would have with you as a parent. Okay, and these are the things that we just talked about. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, this is a general timeline. So as I mentioned, now you have your PSAT scores. If you're able to start early enough, we would recommend taking the practice SAT and ACT tests in the summer before the junior year. Then we can help you compare those scores, decide which test is a better test for the student, SAT or ACT. And then we would help you make a plan about which test to prepare for and when the student should plan to take the actual test. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the SAT and the ACT. And again, if you have any questions, please chat in. Okay, so most students will take the actual SAT or ACT for the first time in the fall or the spring of the junior year. And again, this may be determined by how they do on their PSATs and whether they need to spend more time building their basic skills before they take the actual exam. The students can retake the test as many times as they need to, all the way up through the fall of their senior year. So they can take it in junior year, the summer in between junior and senior year, and even in the fall of senior year. All colleges accept those tests, the SAT and the ACT. So you don't have to worry about one test being more acceptable than another. But college requirements vary, so you need to do your homework. If you're looking at specific colleges, we recommend these 2 websites. They have a lot of information about the individual colleges, and of course you can go to each college's website. But these will list the kinds of SAT and ACT scores that these colleges are looking for. As we just mentioned, one test is not favored over the other, so that's not a concern. But what if the student takes a practice SAT and a practice ACT and the scores are equivalent? How do we decide which test to prepare for? Okay, some of the basics that we're going to talk about in helping students make that decision. In general, the SAT is more of a power test, and the ACT is more of a speed test. So that means that the reading level on the SAT is a bit higher than it is on the ACT. The SAT has more difficult questions in general, whereas the ACT has more straightforward questions. But where it comes into the speed thing is that the ACT is much more fast-paced. So students generally have to answer more questions in fewer minutes than they would on the SAT. The SAT has a 30 to 40% more time per question, but don't forget, those questions are harder overall. Now, basic comparison between the SAT and the ACT, we talked about before. ACT is faster paced compared to the SAT. Questions are more straightforward. And on the reading, they have a balanced emphasis, which means there are quite a few different subject areas on the ACT, whereas on the SAT, there are fewer subject areas, and there's more of an emphasis on the science in the reading. The ACT has a second science section, which the SAT doesn't have. But on the SAT, you'll find science questions throughout the test. The writing portion of the SAT includes graphs and charts. On the ACT, it does not, because again, that's going to be in the science section. The math comparison, on the SAT, is a heavy emphasis on algebra and data analysis, which comprises around 50% of the overall score. So even though they both go up through a pre-calculus level of math, the SAT is primarily focused on these areas of algebra and data analysis and problem solving. The ACT is a much broader range of topics, and the ACT covers a good amount of algebra, geometry, trigonometry. It's not as focused on the algebra. The overall score on your ACT is made up of 4 different scores: the reading, the English, the math, and the science. And therefore, the math only makes up 25% of your overall score. On the SAT, your math score is actually half of your overall score. So that's a consideration when we help students decide. For example, if a student has a very low math score, they may want to take the ACT because it's only going to affect 1/4 of their overall score, whereas on the SAT, math makes up half of their overall score. That's one of the things we look at. The second thing is on the science section, since the ACT has the science section, the SAT does not have a science section. If a student has a considerably higher reading score on the ACT, they potentially will do very well on the science with some coaching. We find that students who do well in reading can also do really well on the science section. A lot of times they're not scoring that highly on the science at the beginning because they're not familiar with the types of questions. But once we train them on it, their scores on science can improve quite a bit. So that's another reason we might decide to do one test or the other. So looking at some of these factors, how the students score in math and what the reading scores are, can help us determine whether one test is a better fit than the other. And as I mentioned earlier, the pacing, since the ACT is faster paced and the SAT is a little bit slower paced, that may come into also the decision about which test to prepare for. One other thing to consider is that many of our students, even if they prepare for one test or the other, they may end up taking both tests in the end. So if we do an SAT preparation program with a student, and they take the SAT, they may also go ahead and take the ACT at a later date because the preparation that we do for one test is very helpful for the other test. So even though we focus on one test and we do the preparation, oftentimes the kids will take a couple of practice tests on another test when they finish. So if we do all SAT, they're done with the SAT, they can take a couple of the ACT practice tests and then they'll try that test too. But their ACT score should have improved quite a bit as well, just with the regular test prep that we did. In general, 80% of our students get somewhere between 150 and 390 point improvement on the SAT. It's typically in this 150 point range. At ACT, schools generally increase the composite score between 3 and 5. That's on a different scale than the SAT. The maximum score in the ACT is 36. This tells you a little bit about some of our tutors. We have a wonderful group of tutors. They've been with us, many of our tutors have been with us for 10 or more years. These are people who come from a wide range of professions, and they really know what they're doing. They're top scorers, and more importantly, they know how to teach. So that's the presentation. If you have any individual questions, please go ahead and text the questions to me in the chat area. Show you that. Go back to the beginning of the slide so I can show you where that is in case you need to ask me a question. That's up at the top of your screen, a little chat icon. If you have additional questions you want to ask me after the presentation, you're welcome to email me, and you can use my email here, dan@a+tutoring.com, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions by email or to give you a call and answer any other questions after. So thank you so much for attending, and I'm going to end the conference now, and I will also be sending you a copy of the slides and a copy of the recording.